Hi, this is the host. Today we're going to look at the life and work of a very interesting philosopher, Arius Didymus. He was a Stoic philosopher and a teacher of Augustus. And what we have from him today is that he wrote these two handbooks, one on Stoic doctrine and one on Peripatetic doctrine. So we're going to be looking at both of those today. I hope you enjoy. So Arius Didymus was born in Athens in about 100 BCE and died there in about 40 BCE. His father was named Aristo, and he had another brother named Under. Now Diogenes Laertius says that he was a hearer of Zeno, but that could impossibly be true because Zeno died in 76 or 75 BCE and Arius was born in 100 BCE, so he couldn't have been alive then. However, he probably did study under Cleanthes, who was Zeno's successor, and Chrysippus, who was Cleanthes' successor. Both of them were Stoics. In fact, all of these guys were Stoics. Didymus seems to have taught rhetoric at some point in Athens, and apparently he was so good that Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, sent for him and hired him as a teacher for his son, Marcus Caesar. That doesn't seem to have worked out too well because Marcus Caesar ended up being executed for trying to kill Augustus. But Didymus was still held in such high regard that even after that he was invited to Rome and given Roman citizenship, which he accepted. And he lived out the rest of his days in Athens. What we have from Didymus today is these two books, the Excerpta de Moribus and this. They were written as handbooks for his students, and in some ways they're pretty similar to the handbooks that we've looked at before, like the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius or the Discourses of Epictetus. And yet they're different because they're more like systematic summaries of Stoic and Peripatetic philosophy, whereas the Meditations and the Discourses are more personal and reflective. The Excerpta de Moribus is dedicated to his student Erasmus, and it's a summary of Stoic ethics. The work is divided into three parts, each headed by one of the cardinal virtues. The first part discusses wisdom, which includes piety and deals with questions like the nature of the soul and the gods and fate. The second part discusses courage, which includes justice, and it deals with questions like anger and grief and dealing with other people. And the third part discusses moderation, which includes what they called which isn't really incontinence in our sense of the word, but rather self-discipline and self. These are the main topics that Stoics were concerned with. Things like emotions and how we ought to respond to things, how we ought to deal with other people. In each section, Didymus gives a definition of the concept, explains its importance, and then gives examples of how it should be practiced. It's very much a handbook, like I said, a manual for living the good life according to Stoicism. There's a couple of interesting discussions in here. For instance, he talks about the Stoics' view of anger. Anger, he says, is a response to what you think is an insult. It's caused by a judgment of some sort, and if you don't have that judgment, there can't be any anger. Then he asks the question, should we ever be angry? And he answers, yes. When someone does something that deserves anger, such as killing someone else's child, we should be angry because it's shameful. But what about when someone takes away your property? Is that okay to be angry about? Well, no, not really, because that's just their opinion. You see, the Stoics believed that the only thing that was good was virtue. Everything else was indifferent. So anger over losing property is anger over something that's not really bad. And so it shouldn't be directed at anything that's actually bad. Instead, you should just accept it and let it go. If it's something that's worth being angry about, then it's something that's worth accepting and letting go of. So that's what he says here. He also has an interesting discussion of dealing with difficult people. There are four kinds of people, he says, who are difficult to deal with. The boastful person, the person who tells long stories, the person who interrupts everyone, and the stupid person. You should be polite to the boastful person, even if you think they're full of themselves. Don't challenge the person who tells long stories. Just sit there and listen patiently. Don't interrupt the person who interrupts everyone. And as for the stupid person, he says that you should treat them like a child. So I think what he means there is to be patient with them, to try to lead them in the right direction. I think that's what he means. Now, this handbook was very popular. It went through many editions. It was translated into Latin and it was read by medieval monks. In fact, there's a copy of it that's still around from around 900 CE, which is amazing. It's really great to see that this stuff was being read and copied all throughout the centuries. This handbook was extremely influential in the development of Christian ethics. In fact, Augustine says that he read it when he was young. There are parallels between the teachings of Didymus and the teachings of Jesus, and I know that's a controversial topic, but it's certainly worth exploring. Now, the other book that we have from Didymus is the Sutra, and that's a handbook of peripatetic physics, logic, and ethics. So this one's not just ethics, it covers other areas as well. It's dedicated to his student Athena. And again, it's just a handbook. He gives you a nice little summary of peripatetic doctrine here. I won't go through the whole thing, but I do want to mention the interesting discussion that he has on the nature of the soul. He says that the soul is like a wax tablet, and that's because it can be marked on. Like he says, when it comes into existence, it's like a blank slate. And then as we experience things and learn things, impressions are made on it, just like on a wax tablet. He also says that the soul is like a piece of cloth, and that's because it can be dyed. The Stoics believed that the soul could be changed. It wasn't fixed, it could be improved. You could make yourself a better person through your actions. It's also like a piece of wood. He says, because it can be shaped and reshaped. so it's malleable in a lot of different ways. It can be changed. He also talks about the Stoics' view on the afterlife. He says that they believe in a sort of Hades where souls go when they die. It's like a holding place, a sort of waiting room where souls are kept until they're reincarnated. And while this is a plausible view, he says, because it would explain why some people are born into poverty and others into wealth, he thinks that the more likely view is that there is no afterlife at all. We only have this one chance to get it right. So you better get busy doing that. That's what he says. So those are the two books that we have from Arius Didymus, the Exuptade Moribus and the Suit. They're both very interesting and they're both very important sources for understanding Stoic philosophy. If you'd like to learn more about Stoic philosophy, I've got lots more videos on it. Just search for Stoic and you'll find them all there. If you'd like to learn more about ancient philosophy in general, check out my podcast available on various platforms. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.